Hi everyone! Let's create, appreciate, and F that hate. Welcome back to Nikkaflora. I hope you all are enjoying the new year so far. As for me, there isn't really anything new going on in my life at the moment. I've just been doing my own thing, talking, hanging out with my friends, and playing games. Yeah, I know this kind of makes me sound like a teenager, but this is generally what I do. Or pretty much what I've always done. But anyways, let's get down to the video. In my previous video, which is called How to Start Writing a Short Story, I shared a process which can help people organize their thoughts and get going with their writing. Oftentimes, taking the first step is the hardest, but once you start walking, it's not as bad the more that you do it. I also said that I'll be sharing the short story based off of my process in this video, so here we are today, guys. If you prefer to read the story instead, you can check out my blog post, which is called Short Story 4, The Real Estate Wife on Nikkaflora.com. Same title as this video. Click on the link in the description below to check it out. I would pretty much appreciate it. I've also posted a link to my previous blog post, which is called How to Start Writing a Short Story. It's pretty much the same one that I mentioned earlier. If you would like to try writing your own story and you needed some guidance, so there's that blog post to help you guys out. Without further ado, let's get on with the video. It's kind of longer and different from the last short stories I've written so far, but it's still a really good story and I'm pretty sure you guys are going to enjoy it. So let's go. Short Story 4, The Real Estate Wife. Daddy would always take me to the top of the Empire State Building every year when I was a kid. Even though I was very familiar with it, I'm still amazed whenever we watch the sun set into darkness, resting until the next day, and then the stars eventually emerged, winking at me from above. My father was always my hero. He used to be a finance manager at various companies. While he loved making calculations and spitting out terminology I barely understood, Daddy decided to leave his last job, used most of his savings, and started a real estate business. Mommy and I were excited for him. However, it was very difficult for us during the first few years. Mommy couldn't just be a housewife anymore and had to get a job at a manufacturing company to help pay the bills. My parents got into angry arguments because there were times when we could only afford bread and nothing else. It took a long time for Mommy to come around, but she tried her best to believe in her husband, even when we only saw frozen bread and the promise of riches. While Daddy never became rich like how we wanted, he became successful enough to provide comfort again. I knew something was working when he arrived home one day with a cake, as well as a variety of meat, fruits, and vegetables. I asked Daddy what his secret was. I also asked him if quitting his job was worth the struggle for the past 4 years. Daddy just handed me a peeled orange and told me to take a bite of it. I still remember my face scrunching in disgust at my first bite. When I took another one, the sour taste wasn't as strong and began to taste really sweet afterwards. I stopped eating the orange when I realized I got distracted. I turned to Daddy and told him that he didn't answer any of my questions. Daddy only smirked at me and said he did give me an answer. He said I'll understand when I'm older. We were able to enjoy the fruits of his labor for a few more years until Daddy fell ill. He collapsed in a meeting with some potential clients who rushed him to the hospital. Mommy and I got there as fast as we could, but the doctors even appeared to be more ill than Daddy when they told us the news. They said Daddy had a tumor in his brain and it grew tremendously since last year. Mommy fainted from shock, and the nurses carried her to an empty room to rest. Meanwhile, I stayed at Daddy's side until he woke up. When Daddy saw me, he engulfed me in a hug and asked where Mommy was. I told him Mommy fainted but is sleeping right now. Daddy held me, shut his eyes tightly, yet some tears slipped out. I asked him what a brain tumor was and when he's going to get out of the hospital. Daddy said it's a form of cancer, a very deadly disease, and there was no cure for it. I didn't fully understand everything he said, but I knew it was terrible. I just cried and held on to Daddy like my life depended on it. At first, Mommy tried to stay strong and refused to give up. She and some of Daddy's friends ran his business for months, but it wasn't sustainable. No one had Daddy's wit and instincts. Mommy eventually shut down his business and used the remaining money to help fund Daddy's treatments. The doctors did everything they could, doubling on chemotherapy, putting Daddy on an extreme diet, and even conducting experimental trials. Sometimes it felt like our efforts worked, but we all knew the truth. We continued to watch Daddy get weaker and weaker as his life slipped away. One day, not long before Daddy died, he called Mommy and me to his room. Mommy usually cried whenever she visited him, but I tried to greet him with a smile most of the time. Daddy looked at us in pain, yet gently smiled at us. He told us that he got us gifts, giving Mommy and me 2 small boxes. He told me to open mine first. My breath was taken away for a moment when I saw that it was a necklace of the Empire State Building, my favorite building in the world. He placed it around my neck, which made me cry, not because of sadness this time, but because I remembered how beautiful and precious our memories were. Daddy then said something I'll never forget. Just like that building, you must always dream big and reach for the stars. Make life worth living. Mommy was touched by this moment and kissed Daddy's forehead. He then turned to Mommy and told her to open her gift. Mommy did and started shaking when she saw that there was a silver ring with a pink gemstone in the middle. She said it's a replica of the promise ring Daddy gave her many years ago. Daddy smiled and said to Mommy, "I'll always love you and be with you." And he apologized for not being able to live long enough this time, but he'll meet her again in the next life. Mommy and Daddy cried and hugged each other for several minutes until they both looked at me. Mommy just said that she wanted me to be with my true love someday too, someone as sweet and kind as Daddy. Eventually, it happened. It took years, but I met Henry after I turned 25. I was working as a secretary at Calypso Enterprises while this handsome man walked in and approached me at the front desk. Henry introduced himself and said he had a meeting with my boss at 1:45 p.m. I told Henry he was 20 minutes early, and Mr. Covey won't be coming down until 1:40. Henry just nodded and asked if I could keep him company for the time being. As soon as I said yes, Henry smiled like he was a little kid who got a toy for the first time. He asked me how my job was and if I liked working here. He asked what kind of person Mr. Coffee is. Henry even asked if the coffee in the lounge burned holes in your stomach. That last part made me laugh. Talking to this intriguing man was amazing until my boss came down to fetch Henry. He seemed disappointed that our conversation was cut off prematurely. As the men walked away, Henry turned around and gave me a cheeky wink. Luckily, our first meeting wasn't our only interaction. Henry visited my workplace at least a few times a week. He claimed he had ongoing business with Mr. Covey, but we both knew he was there early to see me. Henry's presence, intellect, and his charms eventually melted my heart. We got married a year later. Our first 2 years of marriage were nothing but blissful. Henry was an amazing husband. He worked hard and made sure my needs were taken care of. We went out on dates every week, and Henry was often kind and understanding whenever we had disagreements. Although I resigned from Calypso not long after the wedding, I worked at other companies so that I could continue to save money for my future endeavors. This baffled Henry at first. He was raised by a traditional family, which meant that his mother was only a housewife and his father was the breadwinner. Henry expected our marriage to follow the same dynamic, but I made it clear that I still wanted to become a real estate mogul, no matter what it took. My husband seemed to support my dream for most of our marriage until I found out my private account was emptied. When I contacted the bank, they informed me that Henry transferred all of my money to our joint account. He also restricted access, making sure I wouldn't be able to retrieve anything. As much as I love Henry, this was the first time I've ever been extremely angry with him. I worked long hours throughout my 20s to save those thousands of dollars. I planned on buying my first rental property before I turned 30. Henry knew I found out because he wasn't fazed once I confronted him. He tried to be gentle with my feelings at first, but what hurt me the most was seeing how he didn't regret his decision at all. I asked him why he did this. Henry confessed he wasn't making enough money at his job anymore. He showed me a stack of bills he previously hid in his briefcase. I winced when I saw the red ink stamped on the envelopes, indicating that we were behind on our mortgage and utility payments. I stopped yelling when I realized how much stress and despair Henry had been in. He was coming home every day with a smile on his face, yet did everything in his power to make sure I wouldn't worry about anything. I told Henry that he should have come to me for help. I told him I could have worked more hours or helped him find a better job. From my suggestions, Henry's frustration seeped through. He exclaimed he did those, and then some, for the past several months. Henry told me that he didn't want me to see him as a weak and useless husband. He said he was sorry for taking my money, but he was on the verge of being laid off. He felt as if he had no other choice. My husband was normally a calm and friendly man. However, he finally expressed his true feelings about my dream and our marriage. Henry said, while he wants me to be happy and to reach my dreams in life, he claimed I haven't acted like his wife in a long time. Henry hated the days when I was gone at work all day. He hated coming home and having to eat by himself. He hated how I spent less time with him as I became more obsessed with my goal. My anger returned after I listened to every one of these instances. Henry continued to rampage on how I'd been neglecting our marriage and his needs. I lost it when he proclaimed that it was a woman's duty to be a housewife and to take care of her husband. This next moment was very dramatic, but I was done with Henry's sexist views. I remember telling him that maybe I shouldn't be his wife anymore. Removing the ring from my finger, I threw it on the floor before storming out of the house. Henry looked as if someone slapped him in the face. He was petrified for a few moments until he chased me down to our front yard. I was about to hop into my car, yet Henry grabbed my arm and yanked me back. Henry was horrified and afraid of what just occurred. He said that I didn't mean it. He tried speaking to me gently and told me to come inside so we could talk. I burst out crying as I gripped the car door. I told Henry I probably would have forgiven him for taking my money, but I said it was unacceptable for him to crush my dreams and belittle me for who I am. With that being said, I finally drove off and watched Henry fade away in my rearview mirror the farther I went. I knew Henry wanted to chase me immediately, but his car was currently being repaired at an auto shop. The next 3 years were hell. I lived in my car while working on and off. I tried to secure a stable job, however, companies often looked down on homeless women. Regardless of how impeccable my career experience was, there were many times when I wanted to come back home and run into Henry's arms, but my pride took over once I recalled how devastated I was from that day. Although I often struggled, there were some silver linings. I traveled to most states and saw what the world was like outside of New York. I felt how warm the sand was back in Florida's beaches. I tried out Chicago's infamous hot dogs and pizza. I even traveled to California and visited the gorgeous Lake Tahoe. Along the way, I gradually made friends who either helped me get by or pointed me out to new leads. I learned everything I could before I felt confident enough to buy my first property. The 4th year of being on my own was so much better. I had enough income from my real estate business to finally be able to afford comfort. I bought a beach house along the shores of Santa Cruz and surfed whenever I didn't have work. Over time, my business eventually blossomed without much interference from my part. I hired amazing staff who handled any mishaps. My profits grew tremendously, which made me a millionaire a year later. I became so successful that even the government recognized my efforts. One day, I was relaxing at home until the doorbell rang. Then I was shocked to see a couple of men dressed in fancy suits standing there. They introduced themselves as Secret Service agents who were sent by the president himself. They handed me a letter with a seal on the back. The 2 men said they will be in town for the time being. They also instructed me to call them once I have an answer to the president's invitation. After they left, I immediately opened the letter. I almost dropped it when I read that the president wanted me to be the key speaker at the entrepreneurial summit they host every year in Washington. The president chose me specifically because he thought it would be an honor to show the world that women can be successful too. He realized that the upcoming 21st century would be an era of change. Women didn't only have to be housewives anymore. They can be whoever they want to be, even in a man's world. After I called the agents to tell them I accepted, I was whisked away to Washington. The president ensured I didn't have to pay anything, as he covered all of my travel and boarding expenses. I reviewed my script and relaxed at my hotel suite until the day of the summit arrived. Everything seemed to go by in a blur except when the president summoned me to the stage. I did my best to hide my nerves and plastered on an award-winning smile. There were many faces, especially women from different backgrounds, who traveled here just to witness my speech in person. The first thing I talked about was Daddy in my childhood. I emphasized how important it is to have parents who support you and your dreams despite whatever society says. I also talked about how success isn't a linear path. People would have to go through many obstacles which challenged their will and character. I went through most of my lines until I heard a man's voice call my name. I looked in the crowd, watched it part, and froze once I saw Henry running frantically toward me. Henry was only a couple 100 feet away from the stage until 2 agents intercepted him and forced him to the ground. Everyone was shocked by the interruption. Henry continued to call out my name and said that he needed to talk to me. The agents intended on dragging him away, however, I jumped from the stage to be by his side. I yelled at them to let him go. The agents were confused and asked if I knew him. I rolled my eyes and said, of course I knew him because he's my husband. Once they finally understood, they finally released him, and Henry embraced me immediately. All of my emotions I suppressed for the past 5 years bubbled from underneath the surface as I remember how warm he felt. I asked why he was here, and Henry sheepishly looked at me. He said he's sorry for what happened that day. He said he should have supported me in my dreams. He wanted us to be together again. Henry said he's been searching endlessly for me. He finally knew my whereabouts when he saw in the news that I was going to be the key speaker at the summit. He told me how proud he was, and he's happy I achieved my dream of becoming a real estate mogul. Henry meant every word, yet some people in the crowd were skeptical. Someone yelled about how Henry only came because he found out his wife was now rich. Most people quickly joined, accusing Henry of only wanting my money. This made tears slip out of Henry's eyes as he argued against their claims. As he met my gaze, Henry said he doesn't even care about my money. At the very least, he wanted to apologize for his actions, even if I do decide to divorce him. The crowd was whipped into silence after understanding the sincerity of Henry's words. Henry reached into his pocket, uncurled his fist, and revealed my wedding ring, the one I tossed away all those years ago. Henry said he's giving me a choice. If I wear the ring again, we stayed married, and I shall never run away from him ever again. If I don't wear the ring, then he won't fight me if I choose to file for a divorce. I stared into my husband's eyes as I held onto my Empire State necklace Daddy gave me. In this moment, I remember when Daddy gave Mommy a promise ring, not long before he died, and how both of my parents wished for me to be with my true love. Tears dripped from my face as I made my final decision. Henry appeared to be nervous for my reaction until I picked up the ring and slipped it onto my finger, where it rightfully belonged. My husband sighed in relief before he lifted my chin and pulled me in for a kiss. The crowd cheered as they watched us reconcile. Henry chuckled at their reaction, which made me laugh too. It was on this day that I learned the most important lesson of all. While success is important, it's nothing compared to the love my husband and I share. Anyways, thanks for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it. I definitely loved it. Again, if you ever want to read this story again, you can click on the link in the description below to check out my blog post. It's the same title as this video, Short Story 4, The Real Estate Wife. Also, join the Nikkaflora fam today by visiting Nikkaflora.com and subscribe to my mailing list for my weekly newsletter, as well as my social media. Subscribe to the Nikkaflora channel, give this video a thumbs up, and click on that notification bell so you don't miss out on anything. Yeah. Comment down below if you're writing a short story. What is your experience like? Does writing come naturally to you, or do you have trouble coming up with ideas? Let me know about your thoughts in the comments down below. I'll be back with the new video and blog post next Friday. Until then, let's create, appreciate, and F that hate. Bye guys!